for. I wouldn't say it's the only requirement, and we've had a debate about this in previous shows as well, with different people, all walks of life, doing our broadcast. Not being able to speak Tagalog or Filipino, broadly speaking, does not preclude you from being a Filipino, and no one should ever make you feel that way. But I've heard so many stories, and I've experienced it myself, where if you're not fluent in Filipino, there are certainly Filipinos out there that will say you're not Filipino. So,
a Kangaroo Fern production.
Welcome
to Guerrilla Podcast, Fresh Eyes.
The beat that makes you feel good.
A weekly podcast that features interviews with social change leaders or individuals that aims to bring audiences good stories to motivate their own social impact efforts. Now, here's your host.
Hello, Humanisa. Welcome to another episode of Guerrilla Podcast, Fresh Eyes. Hey, welcome to 2020, and this is our second or season 2, episode 1 of the Guerrilla Podcast. Thank you so much to all our sponsor. If you want to sponsor this podcast, please visit our patreon.com/kangaroofirm, or you can email us at info@kangaroofirm.com. On our first episode, Season 2 in 2020, we're talking about broadcasting. We're talking about how is the Filipino culture diversify in Australia. So what's the Filipino community doing to integrate in Australian society? For this episode, we are very lucky that our guest for today is a Filipino born, and he is the chairman of FIVB, EVI 103.1 FM. It's a multicultural radio station in South Australia and Adelaide, and he also the vice president of National Ethnic Multicultural Broadcasting Council. Please welcome Juan Paolo Legaspi. Thank you so much. How are you today?
yeah, good. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Much appreciated, Miko.
Thank you so much. So, before anything else, tell me about yourself.
Well, I was born in Manila, but I grew up mostly in Australia. So I was roughly about 2 years. When I was 2 years old, I moved to Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, then Adelaide. And that was just with me. I was an only child with my two parents. They came here almost post-Marcos, at the end of the Marcos era, and grew up here, basically. But we always tried, when I was growing up, I would always go back to the Philippines every year for Christmas, stay there for at least 1 month, even 2 months at a time, to spend time with my family. So I've really tried to stay connected with my roots as much as possible.
How do you involve on 5EVI?
Well, that was through my mum. So she dragged me into it. So I've been broadcasting as a broadcaster on the radio for 10 years now.
Oh, okay.
But before that, I would help research the news articles for Mom, and she would help translate them and get them prepared for a program that was on Friday nights, which was for Dr. Wanta. And that was even when you use text-based browsers to research the news. So that was an interesting time. And that was when news was limited, really, about the Philippines. If you were a migrant coming to Australia, there was very limited news about what was happening in the Philippines. Obviously, things have changed now. But back then, it was quite important.
So you did. So you're saying that you are not, because of your mom, you are in line in the broadcasting?
That's what got me into it.
Get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the perfect timing, I think, because I started researching the news when I was going through late primary school, early high school. And I thought that was a great way of kind of getting in touch with my culture and my roots, especially going through those formative years, trying to, when you're going through your teenage years, you're trying to explore who you are and what you're all about. And I felt that really kept me grounded as a person and as a cultural identity about who I am. But that's how it all started. And then when I went through uni and I graduated from uni, I really saw the advantages of really honing in my creative skills and it helps practice many things. Not only just about how you talk, public speaking talk, but it also helps you formulate your thoughts, keep it short and concise as much as possible. Interview techniques, production skills, all that kind of stuff kind of blended in. And so I started enjoying the administrative side of things a bit more as well, and the production side.
Do you agree that kids nowadays need to learn Tagalog as part of their culture?
I think it's helpful to learn about the language. In an increasingly globalized world, and everyone's interconnected, I think people kind of take that for advantage in the sense that they take that for granted. But the real work and the real rub is learning more about other cultures deeply. It's not good enough just to simply say, I can connect with someone on Facebook and we live in a globalized society. You got to really explore the culture, explore the language. There's even subtle differences between Filipino culture and Filipino Australian culture versus Filipino American culture. There's all these sub-genres underneath it as well. So it's important to really understand that and how your own experiences form who you are as a person, because everyone has their own journey about where they are as a person. And so learning the language is helpful. I wouldn't say it's the only requirement. And we've had a debate about this in previous shows as well, with different people, all walks of life, doing our broadcast. Not being able to speak Tagalog or Filipino, broadly speaking, does not preclude you from being a Filipino, and no one should ever make you feel that way. But I've heard so many stories, and I've experienced it myself, where if you're not fluent in Filipino, there are certainly Filipinos out there that will say you're not Filipino. So I'll make that slight distinction there.
That's a great story. So most of the Filipino are saying some of them can still understand the Tagalog, but they cannot speak on that. Is that because of that? Is the Radyo Filipino born because of that, to communicate with the Filipino community in Adelaide and South Australia as well?
Yeah, it was originally born from isolation, in a sense. You know, it was that constant wave of, I guess in Adelaide and Australia generally, Filipinos didn't come in a wave. Like with the Vietnamese migration, it mostly predominantly came from the Vietnam War. Filipinos have just consistently been coming to Australia over a period of time. But during the 80s and early 90s, it came from a place, Radyo Filipino came from a place of providing information from the Philippines into Adelaide. It's now evolved into a blended mix. You know, we still talk about what's going on in the Philippines, but we also talk about Filipino Adelaidean events as well. And we've got our own kind of subculture as well. So it's kind of evolved into our own hyper-local events, and mixing it with Filipino life as well.
So the Radyo Filipino, so that you have 2 programs. So can you tell us about this program?
3 programs.
3, sorry.
So we've got a 1-hour program on Thursday afternoons. That's called Halo Halo Special. And then we've got a morning program from 8:30 to 9 a.m., a 30-minute program. And that's just a general mixed interest kind of show, just updates, light music and entertainment. Friday nights from 9 to 9:30, previously up to a year and a half ago, was called Radyo. And that was hosted by Dr. Wanta, who was one of the co-founders of Radyo Filipino. That was more like older tunes, croon tunes, for a particular older demographic. Since then, I've established Bacata Radyo, and that's more for a younger audience, but also people that are not necessarily born in the Philippines, but maybe born here, but are interested in Filipino culture as well. So that's the 3 in total.
So the Bacata is like catered to young Filipinos living in Australia?
Yep.
So what is the main objective of that Bacata, the program itself?
It's meant to be making Filipino culture accessible. So we make a distinction with the rest of the other 2 programs in that Bacata is primarily English-speaking language program. And that comes from a place that there's a lot of second and third generation migrants, Filipino migrants that are now living in Adelaide and Australia. And, it's broadcast online, so around the world, that are interested in Filipino culture but don't necessarily speak the language. And we're trying to make it as inclusive as possible, and making being Filipino as broad as possible. And I guess what we're trying to say is we're trying to preserve the culture. And yes, we're trying to preserve the language and our interest in music. But first of all, get them interested. And being Filipino is quite interesting. And that's what we try to celebrate on our show.
On the Tree Show, what do you think is the social impact to everyone, this type of program?
Well, they all have different target audiences. So the Thursday program, I would say the biggest social impact and one of the biggest compliments I've ever heard about the program on the Thursday is that there's a lot of workers that listen to that Thursday program. So we had a great shout out from the chicken workers that work up in the Ingham's factory up in Adelaide's north.
Yeah, there's a lot of Filipino there.
There's a lot of Filipinos there.
I have friends there as well.
And we had feedback that they tune in every Thursday or as many Thursdays as possible when they're working. And I think that's one of the biggest compliments you can ever get, because that there's people listening, but they're also listening intently, and that they find it relevant enough so that they tune in regularly. And I think what they find most useful is that we play music that they find either nostalgic, or we play new songs that they may not have heard of that's from the Philippines. So that's pretty useful. Sunday's a good one because it tends to be like an older demographic that listen in, and they're very loyal listeners. And the Friday program, it's still early days, but one of the things that I would like to do with the Friday program is really reawaken people's interest in being Filipino. So I'm thinking of someone that's maybe half-half or have been shunned from the community because they don't speak Filipino. Because everyone's got, I know it's a very specific targeted audience, but I've been through it myself. Everyone's got a tito or a tita or a relative or family friend that says, "Oh, if you can't speak Filipino, I'm not going to bother with you." And I really want that Bacata Radyo program to really reach out to those people in particular and say, "Look, you are Filipino. It's okay."
That's a great mission. Because a lot of Filipino now, once they migrate here, some of them forgot who they are.
Yeah.
So that's a good program. So aside from the Tree program, do you have anything planned in the future for our Filipino community? You're thinking of?
I think one of the biggest missions, the broad mission in my mind, is to get representation in media in general. And when I look on TV, print media, online media, within an Australian context in particular, you don't see many Filipino Australians out there, and or Asians in general. And that needs to change because it's not truly representative of who we are as a country. And that's one of the biggest missions that I would like to really focus on, whether that's in the media or in any leadership position. I think broadcasting, community broadcasting, helps develop those skills for leadership. So when people come and broadcast on their panels in Bacata Radyo, for example, I don't see them purely as community broadcasters, but I see them as potential leaders because they're the ones that are willing to articulate their thoughts and communicate them online or to a broader audience. And I'm trying to cultivate that mentality to say that the word minority is a bit disparaging. Mm-hmm. We are part of Australian culture by virtue of us living here, and we should start acting like it and act with a bit of confidence. I think there's a lot of cultural identity with being a Filipino Australian, that you have to be a good nurse or a good aged care worker or a good hospitality worker. Nothing wrong with those industries, but we shouldn't shy away ourselves from being considered the best or leaders or that culture of excellence and celebrating ourselves. We don't do that enough, I don't think.
So as a Vice President for National and Ethnic Multicultural Broadcaster Council, have you experienced asking to make like a policy or guidelines to improve the broadcasting to multicultural? Like,
Yep. So there's a couple of primary ways that I'm particularly excited about. So one of them is through new and innovative projects. So one of the projects I'm very, very proud about is getting media accreditation for a station in Melbourne to start. They got media accreditation from the AFL. And so there's people from 4ZZZ that've got training, and we've rolled this program out nationally now. So we've got Andrew from our station here who's done the training in Melbourne. They're now sitting with in the media box commentating live AFL games right next to Channel 7, the mainstream people. And that started off originally as just purely an audio podcast, but then we signed an agreement with Channel 44 in Melbourne, and they hosted a little TV show and they posted that on YouTube. And then about 6 months later, we got approached by Foxtel, who said that on our community channel, Aurora, we would like to have an agreement that we can broadcast that on our community channel as well. So technically speaking, we're putting that out on cable TV, and that's small steps, but that's the model I'd really like to activate a lot more. If the mainstream media is not going to show proper representation, then we've got to make our own brand and go out there and just show it to the world. The other angle is that you break down the doors of mainstream media. So the other one that I'm really passionate about and that we're working on as a project is how do we get up-and-coming journalists that come from a diverse background into those newsrooms. And it's tough. It's tough from any background to actually break into mainstream media journalism, but it's another level to come from a diverse background too. So we're working with another non-for-profit called Media Diversity Australia, and we actually sponsored our first Walkley Awards last year to celebrate diversity in media and media reporting. And we're working on internship programs that's rolling out around the country to really encourage that type of diversity in our newsrooms. And stay tuned, because we're trying to work an agreement with Google News Lab as well to try and focus on positive and encouraging reporting, positive journalism in Australia as well.
Well, that's a fantastic project.
Yeah. If we can get off the ground,
yeah,
but yes.
Yeah. I really agree with you about hard to go to a media industry here. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Back in the Philippines, I was part of a media organization as a journalist. But when I came here in Australia, it's hard to get job in media unless you have to study again, do the intern again. Said, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah. So,
yeah, that's a great project for someone who is into broadcasting.
Yeah, and I mean, like credit to you as well, Miko. I mean, when the going gets tough, the only other option you have to do is create your own content, create your own portfolio, and that's really the only way that you can kind of get your name out there. Because it's tough. Australian culture revolves a lot around more so than other cultures, I guess, about who you know. I mean, we're Filipino, so that's core about who we are as well. But in Adelaide, for example, I've heard stories of people going to job interviews, and one of the first questions they ask you is not your qualifications, but they say, which high school did you go to? And that's what you're dealing with. The industry values more your local. You could be the world leader in your field, but if you didn't go to the right high school in Adelaide, you're not in. And so I think the imperative upon us as a diverse community is to really rally around each other and support each other, and that trying to change the culture of Australia.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of them are saying, do you have any local experience?
Yes.
I said, give me a chance, then I can prove it to you.
Oh, I've heard that there was a fellow that had many years, decades in the finance industry in major banks around the world, but because he had because he didn't work in bank as a local bank, that means he's not worth it. But he's managed multi-million-dollar portfolios in another country. I mean, that's just if we're going to move forward as a country, as a culture. And I'm sorry, and I'm talking more about Australians, but Filipino Australians generally, by and large, consider themselves Australians by the time they migrate here. If we're going to really move forward and heal that together. We've got to change the culture and stop looking inwards and look more outwards.
That's going to be, hopefully, because of your program, someone will look at it and...
It's a small contribution, but I think if many people join that mission, then we'll get there eventually.
So, by the way, how is Filipino community in South Australia?
It's interesting. It's lively. It's got its own personality to it. It's interesting. This could be a slightly controversial comment, but I stand behind my comments. There's a particular wave that came before me that there seems to be a lot of divisions that happen. But my generation and the younger generations after me, I presume, have never seen that, but they are somehow caught up in the politics of the past. So my message to anyone that I come across that has just come to Adelaide or getting involved with Filipino community events is I say, stay away from the politics. We're all in it together, and we all need to rally around each other. But there's a lot of division, and it's not just in Adelaide, it's around Australia. There's a lot of bitter divisions out there.
Especially in Melbourne.
Especially, I've read about it. I've heard about
that. So.
Yeah. And that's not how we're going to move forward. You can't demonstrate a strong united front, not only for Filipinos, but there's a lot of people that hate migrants out there. And when they see ourselves fighting amongst each other, it just makes us look like rabble, really. And it's over really petty stuff. And one of the motivating things I try to think about for myself, and I try to impress upon others that I come across, is that see yourself in your deathbed in decades from now. You're not going to say, I really like when I was president of X community. No one's going to remember you for that. Your legacy is going to last through your deeds and your work, not through your titles. But, some people think otherwise. So,
what do you think the contribution of Filipino community in Australia right now, particularly in South Australia?
Well, it's a long-lasting legacy. So even right through the mid-1800s, Filipinos first came to Australia in Queensland and they were nicknamed Manila Men, pearl diving. Filipinos have had a long history with Australian culture. We've been there since the very beginning. And so if someone down the street yells at you saying, go home go back where you came from.
I experienced that.
Yeah, we have collectively, as a collective, had a long history here. We've contributed to the foundations of this country. And Filipinos have a great sense of responsibility to the place. It's in our DNA. The OFW culture has really been ingrained in us now. And so our contributions go from anywhere from the healthcare sector, business sector. We've got a famous mining and resources magnate that's here as well. Personally, I'm trying to break new grounds in public service as well. Everyone's got their own contributions to make. And actually, one I don't want to miss out is on our culinary contributions as well. There's the rise food's up there. And shout out to Dennis Leslie, who took a big risk by being the head chef down at Adelaide Oval and serving up fine dining Filipino food. Those are the real, groundbreakers, people like that. And so I guess it's just making sure that we celebrate that and also keeping our standards up to say that being average is not good enough. Let's not talk about simply buffet Filipino food. Nothing wrong with that. Great. But like Dennis Leslie, I love this vision. He said, I want to take that and I'm going to make that the best fine dining food in the world. Filipino is fine dining. And I was like, wow, that blew my mind. That actually influenced my thinking a fair bit.
In line with the FIVB FM, so what is the vision of FIVB for multicultural society?
So FIVB sees itself as a peak body for multicultural media in South Australia. And community media is one of the most responsive ways of transmitting a message. In a world of fake news and misinformation, community media is one of the most authentic ways of communicating to your audience. There's very little incentives to skew the news. It's because our sponsorship time is extremely regulated and limited. And a lot of communities can just speak their mind within reasons. You can't say anything defamatory or aggressive or anything like that. But you can really speak to your mind with very little filter at all. And that can't be said about mainstream media news. For example, commercial news have got a lot of editorial pressure, sponsorship pressure, what you can air, and what will attract new listeners. Of course, community media, we try to be relevant. We try to attract new listeners. That's our final metric. But also, there's very little incentive for us to be biased in what we report. And we've had community groups that walk off the street and they said, we want to do a program. We run them through the training program. 2 or 3 months later, they're broadcasting on air. So it's one of the most flexible ways of being able to bridge being a lone operator, getting a camera out and going on YouTube. I would call that the sole operator model. You got community media that's between that and commercial media that provides that structure and infrastructure, but still maintaining your independence. And that's where FIVB sees itself. It's the champion of people that want to take themselves from the sole operator model and want to break it into commercial or mainstream.
So if I have an idea, a program idea, how do I approach the FIVB?
You pitch the idea to the station management. Our station manager, through the board and through the station manager, we've given instructions to say, look, let's be open-minded about how we celebrate diversity. Mm-hmm. We've got airtime both on our analog frequency, digital bands, and we're also planning to revamp our website so we can provide more tailored streaming content as well. So we're as much as a radio station as we are 3 studios that can provide podcasting services. And I think that's an evolving piece. We need to kind of change our mentality about that as well. But the big value about audio podcasts in particular is that you've got a captivated audience that, you've literally got them between their 2 ears. And they might be riding a bike, going on a train, but you've got a captured audience. It's a very personal, very intimate medium. It's quite open. So you can just pitch the idea, and if there's nothing wrong with it, and you've got some infrastructure behind it to say, look, I can back up my content every week, or how often you want to broadcast, then there's very little barriers. Just you have to pay a very minimal maintenance fee to cover our costs.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Any last message to our Filipino Australian or listener or watching this podcast?
I'd say just the value of knowing who you are and celebrating who you are. And we all come through our journeys. I grew up through a high school system that was particularly Caucasian. And it can be very easy to forget who you are as a Filipino and what that means in the context of who you are. The best way to do that is to explore the history, the culture, the food. Start thinking, why is it like this? Why are we talking like that? And I encourage anyone that comes to any revelations or wants to share their stories to come over to FIVB, and I'm more than happy to share your story either through Miko or through Bacata or both. I think the more we talk about those experiences, the better, because it can be an isolating experience at times, and the more you share those stories, the more connected we are.
Thank you so much, Juan Paolo Legaspi.
Yeah,
for that message and story to tell to our listener and audience. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and watching to the Guerrilla Podcast Fresh Eyes, and see you next time again. So see you next week for another episode. If you like the episode, please like, subscribe, and share. And also, if you want to sponsor, please go to patreon.com/kangaroofirm. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Miko.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted in Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or via RSS. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, rate and review this podcast and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and if you want to know more, check out kangaroofern.com.